and welcome to Twisted Remedies. This is a show about the power and importance of jiu-jitsu in trauma recovery and fitness and so many other aspects of life. Training jiu-jitsu has been a huge part of my healing, but there are so many other things that everyday people rely on to heal, rebuild, strengthen, and grow. The conversations we're going to have are meant to explore all of those twisted remedies. I'm Justin Kucher, your host on this exploration. I'm a retired cop, lifelong musician, jiu-jitsu practitioner, and a cancer and trauma survivor. Let's jump right in and talk about our twisted remedies. My guest today is Professor Sergio Caldieri. He is my professor. When I started thinking about doing this podcast and who my guests were going to be, the only person I thought of as far as my first guest and who it had to be was Sergio. As you're going to hear, he has an extensive background in martial arts. He has lived in many places. He's traveled the world. He is a current Burlington, Vermont police officer and is running a Vermont Police Jiu-Jitsu training group that we will get into talking about. I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's jump right in with Professor Sergio Caldieri. All right, we are here with my first guest on as we figure out this podcast thing, Sergio Caldieri. When I was planning on how this was going to go and who guests were going to be, I was the one thing I knew going into this was my first guest was going to be Sergio. Sergio is, as you heard in the intro, is my professor. Probably the most consistent person I've trained with since I started back in 2020. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my great pleasure to be here doing this with you.
Awesome. So one of the fun things about you that I find fun is that no matter what we're talking about, you have kind of been there. So I want to dig into some of that so people have a background. I think it's important to talk about, you have what I would call a vast martial arts background, touching in a lot of different forms and arts. So you want to just give us a rundown on those?
Absolutely, yeah. So I got into martial arts when I was young. Like a lot of young people, the first martial art that I did was Taekwondo. I was about 5 years old. It was me and my sister, she was 3, getting into to Taekwondo. We did that for some years. And then after that, I stopped doing martial arts for a long time. Didn't really get into it until I was older. When I was in high school, I didn't really enjoy doing the whole gym thing. High school that I went to had this program where you could avoid gym by doing something else. And I guess you could say the first martial art I got into when I got older was fencing. I fenced for 4 years in high school and then fenced a little bit in college. Later on was an assistant coach in college under different circumstances. But college is really where I got into martial arts. College, after high school, I started at University of Vermont in Burlington. And University of Vermont at that time had a number of martial arts clubs. And me and my roommate, my freshman roommate, we decided that we were going to go and try out a number of the martial arts clubs. He was big into Taekwondo. I got into Taekwondo again. We did Taekwondo together for some years when I was in college. Tried Aikido. There was a karate club, did some karate, did judo and jiu-jitsu. That's really where my lifelong dedication to judo and jiu-jitsu started. And then after college, moved around a bunch. Everywhere I went, I found a place to train either judo or jiu-jitsu. Stayed consistent with that. Tried a number of different things. On the side, did some more Aikido. I did Tai Chi for a couple years. some Kali Salats, a couple different kinds of karate. Did Goju-Ryu karate for 3 years. I did Ishin-Ryu karate for another 5 years or something like that. Yeah.
It's, like I said, vast. So I'm curious. So you do Taekwondo as a kid. Obviously, you stopped doing that. And then you start, with other things later. Was it, what do you think it was that it didn't, because obviously you enjoy it now, and you've committed significant amount of time in your life to it. What do you think the difference was when you were younger? Was it just not, it didn't didn't check the right box? What was missing?
Yeah, I think that I think when I was young doing Taekwondo, it was fun. It's a good way to spend some time, but it didn't really resonate with me the way that later on some other arts have resonated with me. Jiu-Jitsu, when I started in college, it resonated with me, and it immediately became something that I wanted to do all the time, and did for years and years.
Which you still do all the time.
Which I still do all the time.
we're going to get into that for sure. So the other, as I was saying in the lead-in, like you have been everywhere as far as I'm concerned. You've been everywhere. You've got this this crazy, not crazy. You've got a very unique and I think interesting path that got you back to Vermont. And just from talking, I know obviously you used to own a tattoo shop, lived in a yurt, had a bear encounter, a moose encounter, swam in foreign rivers in the cold, just kind of talk us through the path around the globe, or touching on where you've lived, where you've traveled, kind of, and how those places that you've been have kind of set you up to be where you are now.
Yeah. I've always traveled a lot. Even when I was young, we traveled a lot. We moved around a lot. Moved around when I was a kid. We were back and forth to Italy. We were around New England and New York. Since becoming an adult, I've lived a number of places. After I graduated Burlington, I lived for a year in Reykjavik in Iceland. I lived a couple of years in Copenhagen in Denmark. You could say I lived for a very short time in South Korea, but left there under some circumstances.
What part of South Korea were you in, just out of curiosity? Because I was in South Korea for a bit too.
Was a town called Gyeongju. It was near Daegu.
Yeah. I used to travel to Daegu from Kunsan.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll talk more about that offline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of places.
Yep, lots of places. Yeah, and back in Italy, I've been living back in Italy a number of different times since leaving Burlington the first time. Yeah.
So then you leave, go all kind of travel around, and then ultimately end up back in the Burlington area. This is where you and I met, where you get hired by Burlington PD, and how that seems. How does that happen after? I mean, obviously you had a connection to Burlington, having gone to school here, but when I left, I unfortunately came back. So I always question people that come back to Vermont, like, what brought you back to Vermont? What brought you to policing specifically? Because that seems contrary to, or not contrary, but it seems like an unlikely avenue for you to end up in, and you kind of came to that later in life than a lot of people as well.
Yes,
so
I did, yeah.
How did that happen?
I believe that's a fascinating story. I think that's
of course it is.
So after I graduated UVM, I graduated with a degree in anthropology, double minors in Romance language studies and comparative religion.
None of that surprises me.
So after I graduated there, me and my girlfriend at the time, we decided we were going to go to Korea and teach English for a bit. That, as I said, was short-lived. There were circumstances, ended up coming back to the States for a very short time before moving to Italy at that point. I still wasn't sure what I wanted to be doing. But that's where I start to collect a number of different experiences and skills that ultimately lead me back here. I was living in Italy. My grandfather passed away. I moved back in with my grandmother to try to help out with her, and also to try to figure out where my life was going.
And that's in Italy.
Yeah, that's back in Italy. And on a whim, I applied to graduate school in Denmark, University of Copenhagen, one of the preeminent research universities in Europe. Has a great anthropology program, and I thought, hey, maybe I'm gonna keep going in this direction, study linguistic anthropology. I love languages, always had an interest in that sort of thing.
How many languages do you speak?
Well, I speak 3 or 4. I speak a couple fluently. I speak English, I speak Italian, I speak Neapolitan dialect. That's what my grandparents spoke. They didn't speak proper Italian. They're from the South.
Yeah.
That's the only language they ever knew. My Spanish is okay. My French is not great. My Portuguese is okay.
But you don't speak Korean.
No,
Interesting.
I was learning Korean, and then when I left, I stopped learning Korean.
Okay. Because that's not a. I mean, I when I was over there in the military, I learned a couple of phrases here and there, but that's not an easy language. It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't translate as well as some of the other closer languages.
Yeah, it was going to be an exciting challenge for me, but unfortunately the opportunity to continue that
went away.
Evaporated when I fled. So
yeah.
Some Danish, some Icelandic. I was studying Icelandic when I was living in Reykjavik, among other things. So a handful of stuff.
Awesome.
Still have some phrases in Bulgarian. I can say things like I need a drink and I didn't do it.
all the useful
things,
phrases when traveling.
Yep.
So you're in Italy, you're in all these other places, but then Vermont is somehow back on the horizon.
Yeah, so I ended up getting into school in Copenhagen. I went to graduate school there. Got a master's degree, was going to stay into a PhD. So I'm thinking that my life is going in an academic direction, and then some events back in the States pulled me back here. Ended up in Massachusetts, again, trying to figure out what I wanted to be doing in life. Took a number of different jobs. I was studying shiatsu for a while, studying Tibetan medicine. I was working in a tea house. I was working as an EMT. I was working as security at a nightclub, and I was teaching jiu-jitsu for a martial arts club at a college in Western Mass. All the while, I'm still training judo and jiu-jitsu pretty consistently. Like at that point, I think between teaching and training, I was averaging about 5 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was, it was the judo, the jiu-jitsu. That was, again, that when I was teaching at the college, that's where I was getting into like Ishin-ryu karate and mixed martial arts and other stuff too. The place that I was training jiu-jitsu at the time was down in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. Great guy, Rick Torres, who was my professor down there. And he was a retired Connecticut state trooper. Training with him, I started to get exposed to a lot of guys who were in law enforcement, who were training to supplement their job in law enforcement, and a lot of great guys who I really just enjoyed being around and listening to their stories, and they were taking the time out of their busy lives, on their own spare time to go and do something to try to make them better government agents to help people to bring.
What year is that? Because that, that's still and we'll talk more about the benefits for law enforcement down the road, but I'm curious, that seems pretty ahead of the curve.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of them, and it was definitely before the big push for jiu-jitsu and law enforcement. We're talking like 2013.
Oh, so that's super early.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, Rick Torres, he was, he got into jiu-jitsu as a Connecticut State Trooper in the late 90s. He was involved in some of like the earliest Gracie grapple for law enforcement.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was how he ended up in jiu-jitsu in the first place. He'd been doing it since then.
Wow.
And he was a big proponent of jiu-jitsu for defensive tactics. Meanwhile, I was also training judo up in Massachusetts, training partners up there. One of the training partners I had there, I guess, is now pretty high up in the Massachusetts State Police. He's lieutenant colonel of the Massachusetts State Police, in charge of like training and stuff. And yeah, some of the other guys. One of my best friends, one of my training partners in judo, while we were training together over the years, he decided that law enforcement was where he wanted to be going, and he became a police officer in Northampton, Mass, where I was living. Between him, my friend Steve, who did that, and Rick Torres down in Connecticut, I started to seriously consider that this might be something that is the right fit for my life. I had the experience as an EMT. I loved helping people. I had all this martial arts experience, and I figured that this was the best place to put it to use. So I started applying for police jobs. It took a few years, but I was finally hired in Burlington.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember. And that was what year? Was that 20 or was that 19?
That was January of 2020. That's was my official hire date.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a funny story too, how I ended up back in Burlington, because I was living in Western Mass.
Yep.
I had applied to a department, Brattleboro, which is down on the Massachusetts border. Their residency requirement allowed you to live in Franklin County, Massachusetts, which is where I was living at the time. I was living in a yurt in Franklin County. And I had applied. I went through the process for Brattleboro, and the whole state sends their candidates to the police academy to do a battery of tests. While I was there, I ran into Dave Clements, who was the recruiter for Burlington at the time. Dave Clements and I knew each other from way back when I was doing jiu-jitsu at the University of Vermont. I think I met him somewhere like my junior year or senior year. He had started to drop in and train with us. And so when I saw him...
So you recognized him
I recognized him. I was like, oh, I know him. I used to do jiu-jitsu with him.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I went up and I said hi. I was like, I don't know if you remember me, but we used to do jiu-jitsu together. And he said, yeah, I remember you. You're doing a really good job on the fucking run today. Sorry, you did a really good job on the run today. Have you ever considered working in Burlington? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm going through for Brattleboro, but if it doesn't work out, I'll let you know. And it did not work out. So here I am.
Awesome. And you're still at Burlington, obviously.
Yep.
That is, that speaks to how small Vermont is, and how, the law enforcement community in Vermont is even smaller, because, the fact that you ran into Dave at the one, the police academy, only location, the only central location for, where all cops in Vermont have to pass through. That's
right.
Funny. So, a lot of the podcast is geared toward the benefits of jiu-jitsu. So, we talked for a little bit about Taekwondo didn't resonate when you were younger,
mm-hmm.
and then years later, as you start going to the club, and you encounter jiu-jitsu, you encounter judo, both of which, for the listener, you're black belts in.
Yep.
Those obviously did resonate. So, specific to both, or they're obviously connected in their history anyway. But what was it, or what is it about jiu-jitsu and judo that did resonate and that kept you, or that got you back interested and got you to stick with those as these are the arts that I'm gonna run with?
Right. Yeah. Judo and jiu-jitsu, especially jiu-jitsu though, there's just so many facets to it. There's so many things that resonate, and the things that spoke to me early on aren't necessarily the same things that keep me going now. Like early on when I started jiu-jitsu in college, I remember going to that first class, and that's really where I got hooked. It's like, this is different. I had never seen jiu-jitsu before. Like, I'd seen some judo somewhere at some point, but I'd never seen jiu-jitsu up until this point.
And what year was that you're...
So it's the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it was...
So it had been...
It had been around, but it wasn't...
for a decade, yeah. But it hadn't crossed my path at that point. But just seeing it and then doing it, I was like, this is really phenomenal. You put your hands on someone. Like I remember my first time rolling that first day, rolling with it was a purple belt who was in the club at the time. He was getting ready to launch an MMA career. He was one of the students at UVM. But it was a purple belt, and I put my hands on him, and that was just the end of it. I was done. I spent the rest of that round just pinned to the mat, just squirming and trying to, yeah.
This is a strangely familiar story.
Yeah.
For those of you who are in the know, for those of you who aren't in the know, in the episode 1 where I introduced the podcast and I reference the purple belt who felt like a car engine, I think was how I put it, on top of me in my first class. That's who I'm talking to now. So this is clearly a trend, and this is strangely familiar. Where you cannot, I couldn't do anything, and everything sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was on the other end of that.
I'm glad that you also...
Oh yeah, I spent plenty of time on the other end of that. Don't worry. Yeah.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yeah, but I loved it. I was like, oh man, this person can do whatever he wants to me right now. The amount of control is just phenomenal. And at that point in my life, there were a lot of other things going on too. Like it was just a crazy time, and it felt like a lot of my life was out of control. So jiu-jitsu was really made it feel like I was in control of something. Like, this is a path to some sort of, like, what's the word I'm looking for?
You can say superpower. It's
some sort of superpower, yes. It's like, I want to feel as in control as I feel like these people are when they're on top of me, like in some aspect of my life.
Right.
And it's after that first class, I did a deep dive on jiu-jitsu, and I was like, this is incredible. This is amazing. How have I never heard of this? And I was like, this has got to be the ultimate. This is the top.
Yeah. And then obviously that didn't wear off, and you said I think you said it evolved for you, like that. What was the draw initially changed over time? Is that?
Yeah, because initially, you crave that control because it feels like everything is out of control. And later on, it's sort of a way, it makes you feel like that control is still there. When I get older, at this point in my life, at this point in my training, it's not that I'm grasping for some modicum of control over my life. It's bigger than that. It's something more cosmic. Sort of a way to interpret life, and on a more pragmatic level, it's very practical in its control. As a police officer, it's an incredible tool. Not just the physical control that it gives you. If I go out with someone and they decide that they're going to get violent with me, or they're going to get violent with someone else, or they're just not going to do what I need them to do, I've got the ability to say, no, actually you are. No, actually this is what we're going to do. But beyond that physical ability, it comes with this. It comes with a calm. It comes with this feeling of centeredness. There's not this spike of adrenaline as this is starting to happen. I'm confident in my ability to be able to do that. Right? It's not that I think I'm invincible. It's that I know what I'm capable of. I know what I can do, and so I'm not worried that I might have to do it.
I mean, when I've had this conversation with people, I equate it to like it not only affects your confidence and your competency, but I feel like it changes your fight or flight threshold.
Yes.
You don't hit the markers for like the panic and the flight, or that those don't kick in as early because you've become accustomed to being uncomfortable and your threshold of okay,
Right.
now it's really bad, instead of when you have no gauge for that and no marker for that, it's all of a sudden it's immediately bad. Whereas once you've kind of trained yourself, then you can recognize what that looks like, and it's different.
Yeah, the map is much more detailed. The map is much more nuanced.
Yes.
Yeah, so you've got all these little details that people that don't have that are just swinging in the dark.
Do you find that you thrive on, like, the cerebral part of jiu-jitsu for me is like, aside from all the physical benefits, for me the mental health benefits have been great, but like that cerebral, it's like kinetic chess. It's like,
yes, it is.
Like for me, do you feel like that's a big kind of draw for you as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a thinking man's game. You really have to. The more you do it, the more you understand, the more you realize how much more there is that you don't understand, how much more there is that you need to explore, and it never ends.
So even now, as a black belt, you find that you're still like that. Yeah. I've heard that from other people that like you. I think the saying is you get your black belt and then you start over. The learning process starts over, and you're just learning with a new lens or something.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm still learning. I'm still learning new stuff. I'm still relearning old stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I've been doing this. 2 decades, and I go back to some basic things that I've known for years and years, and you discover some new details, some new principles, another way to look at it, and suddenly it opens the floodgates. It's like, how did I never think of that, and what does this mean for all these other things?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
As I expected. So obviously we've talked about like what resonates and the draw and like what's kept you in it. And I think, it's important you inherited the Vermont Police Jiu-Jitsu kind of program from Dave Clements that we talked about, and Gavin. They had kind of, and you were obviously part of getting that going as well. What is can you talk about the program, the importance of, we talked about like the importance for law enforcement briefly, but can you really kind of drive home like why it's so crucially important that law enforcement trains and like what the program is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the program that we have right now is it's free training in jiu-jitsu for law enforcement officers. So it's law enforcement only sessions of jiu-jitsu that come free of cost up until blue belt. Trying to get police officers to get their foot in the door, trying to get them onto the mat somehow. And the most effective way that we can do that is by offering them free training, right? Come in, try it out. All the other people here are cops. All the other people here are friends, right? So all the people on the mats at that point, they all have the same worries stepping on the mats.
Right.
Some of the things that keep cops from coming through the door, things like fear of getting hurt, things like ego, which is something else that we can talk about. But these concerns, these are consistent across across law enforcement. They're the same concerns for all the people that are on the mats at that point, right?
Like running into somebody that you've
someone that you've dealt with professionally, yeah. So creating the sessions is a guarantee that you're going to come in here. You're not going to get some spazzy college student who's just out hunting limbs, who's going to injure you and put you out on workers' comp. Right? Everyone else here is a police officer. Everyone else here has to leave here put on a uniform and be functional on the road. No one here is going to be like, hey, that's the guy that arrested me when I was drunk and throwing things at people in public. I'm gonna get him back now, right?
Right.
No, there's none of that. So creating these sessions is trying to create a safe space, if you will, a safe space for police officers to come in and train. So the program that we have right now, we have open sessions Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We've got stand-up, which is some wrestling, principally judo, because that's most of my background, standing up. And then we have the ground stuff, the real jiu-jitsu after that, followed by an open mat. And we offer that 3 days a week, trying to get people in there.
And am I right? I think at one point Burlington was allowing a certain amount of overtime for, like, to encourage cops to go train. Is that still a thing?
Yes, yeah. And we're very fortunate at the department in that the administration feel strongly that this is an important aspect of our work. Being able to control someone, they recognize that being able to control someone physically is one of the most glaringly prominent pieces of what we do, and so they will pay a certain amount of hours per month. I'm pretty sure it's 8 hours a month in overtime to officers who take the time on their own to go and train jiu-jitsu in these classes. For the sake of expanding this and getting more officers on the mat, we're open to other departments too. As far as I know, other departments aren't offering overtime for their officers. So,
right.
Yeah. So Burlington is hiring.
Shameless plug. I know the answer to this, but people listening are probably thinking, "Wow, cops are getting paid overtime to go train. They can train for free. The mats must be full. The whole department must be there." The reality, obviously, is that it's a fluctuating number of people, but a still relatively low number of the department. Is that?
That is, yeah, that's correct. Yes, it's relatively low. It's lower than I would like to see it. Obviously, I'd like to see everyone in there on the mats at some point.
Yep.
Naturally, there are other things that factor into this, like the fact that we've only got so many hours that we're off per week.
Right.
People have lives outside of work, and I hear that excuse up to a point. Like I feel that up to a point,
yeah,
as being relevant.
Do you think it's a matter of, and this kind of segues nicely into where I wanted to go next, is like the challenges of getting cops to train. I think for looking back at, and obviously I was in a good position at the department when I started training. I had the flexibility to do that, and I'm the way I'm wired. When I like something, I jump in head first and don't worry about how deep the water is and just go for it. But do you think it's a matter of priorities where it just, for some people, it just doesn't rise to where it should? I look at it like, especially if you're still on the job and you're still working, it should be in your, very, very high in your priorities, because it is not only keeping you safe, it's keeping your partner safe, it's keeping your coworkers safe, it's reducing your risk of injuring somebody and putting yourself in a lawsuit or getting jammed up or whatever. To me, that should be way up on the list of priorities. Do you think it's a priority issue, or is it, am I looking at that too broadly?
No, I think that I think that we could boil it down to being a priority issue. It's a priority issue for officers for different reasons than it's a priority issue for administrations. Administrations have a lot of other things to consider that they're happy to point out, that they have to deal with.
Right.
And officers naturally will point out all the different things that they have going on too that makes this not a priority. But really, when it comes down to it, this is sort of a rabbit hole that we can go down. Right. This is sort of an important thing here. This conversation. I get emails. I get officers that come up to me and tell me, "Hey, I just got into this use of force incident. I really wish that I had spent more time on the mat. And if I had a nickel for every time I had someone come up to me and tell me, "Hey, I just had this use of force incident. I wish that I remembered better how to do this, or I wish that I had spent more time doing this, or just I wish that I had taken advantage of all this free training that we have to offer." Because if you look at the security footage of this incident that I just had, you will see this guy mauling me.
Which is not a good feeling when you're supposed to be the one showing up and bringing order to things. That's
right.
That's contrary to what you you hope.
Which is not a good feeling. Which is something that I feel very bad about. I can't believe that one of the officers at my department, where I have all this investment in making sure that this doesn't happen to them, and then this happens to them. I feel on some level I feel bad. I feel like there's something more that I could have done to try to push them to prepare for the situation. But the reality is that most people, most officers, are just not thinking about this incident. They have pretty lies that they prefer to believe about their ability to deal with the situation. They refuse to face the very ugly truth that they are completely powerless when it comes down to it. Right? You've got officers that think, "Oh, you've got the taser, I've got the OC spray, I've got the gun, I've got the presence, I've got my 4 hours of DT training from last year that was state mandated. I've got all my techniques from the academy or I've got the size. I'm bigger than most of the people that I deal with." None of these things are going to protect you against someone who has even the slightest idea what they're doing, or even without some knowledge of what they're doing, just the determination to meet their goals, the determination not to be controlled, can't be discounted. One of the guys, we're affiliated with C4C Police Jiu-Jitsu with gentleman Chad Lyman, who's really a monolith when it comes to police jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu grappling for defensive tactics.
Yep.
He's big on the striking, the wrestling, and especially the grappling is a major factor. And he likes to put it this way. You listen to him talk. There's all sorts of famous talks that he gives one about zoo lions versus wild lions that every time he does it, it brings tears to my eyes every single time. But there's another one that he talks about this comparison that he makes between law enforcement and lifeguards. He said if you're walking on the beach, right? You're walking on the beach, you see some guy, he's out too far in the water, and he's starting to drown, and the lifeguard is right there, right? And he's yelling, "Help me, help me, help me," and you turn to the lifeguard, you're like, "Hey, that guy is drowning out there, he's drowning." The lifeguard turns to you and says, "I don't know how to swim."
That's a problem.
That's a problem. It's the same for law enforcement. We're expected at a moment's notice to show up at these situations where we may be required to put our hands on someone, to fight someone. And you've got police officers who show up to a fight and don't know how to fight. It's if you think about it that way, it's mind-boggling. It leaves me just speechless, just completely speechless. The idea that these people are depending on us to come and impose physical control in this situation, and we've got officers who are just not prepared to do that. It's
like a lifeguard. You mentioned the 4 hours mandated training by the state. It's like a lifeguard who learned to be a lifeguard by sitting in a bathtub full of tepid water by themselves, once a year. I said in the first episode, I consider myself very lucky that I didn't have a worse use of force moment throughout my especially my patrol career. But I think you mentioned when you get these emails or the officers approach you and are like, "Hey, I had this, I wish I had taken advantage of this. This didn't go well."
Yeah.
But then is there follow through where they then show up at at class, or they show up and or want additional training, or is it just in that moment they're like the realization I am missing this component of my training, but I just wanted to verbalize that and then not actually follow through with it. Is that how that shakes out?
For the most part, yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah, they will. Sometimes they'll show up for a little bit after that. Sometimes they'll show up for a little bit until they get enough training that now they feel a little bit more confident. They feel like, oh, now I feel like I could deal with that situation, and then they stop again. Now they've gotten their prophylactic dose of grappling, and now they're off to convince themselves that they're good to go again. Sometimes it's guys, like, it's not always the guys that are never on the mat. Sometimes it's the guys who have trained off and on, and it's just been off for a bit for whatever reason, right? No judgment. But then they get into something and they try to do something, and it doesn't work quite the way that they want.
Because it's a perishable skill.
Because it's a perishable skill. And so they come back and we review the thing that they were trying to do until now it's fresh in their head. And that's all that we see of them. And I encourage them at that point. I'm like, you got to remember that these things go away. Please come, be on the mats more so that you don't end up in this situation again. Other times, other excuses take hold.
Yeah. And how much, you mentioned earlier that obviously ego, and I agree with you, I think ego plays a huge part in this, because your first experience on the mat and mine were similar, where you go in there and you're just completely being dominated, and which for you and I turns out was motivating, but for some other people it is apparently not motivating, because they don't come back, or they're afraid to even, I think there's two components. I think there's one is they're afraid. There are people who are afraid to get on the mats even to try it out because of whatever, ego plays into that. Someone might see through I have this kind of projected persona that other people, see, and if I start training and it's contrary to that, which it will be, that's going to be a problem for their ego. Or the people who go and their ego is impacted because they're like, this was more, I'm more behind than, I could ever get out of, and I can't handle that. Is that, which do you think of those is more powerful? And kind of talk me through like how ego plays into keeping cops on the mat and getting them on the mat.
I think ego plays into getting cops on the mat. I think it plays less into to keeping cops on the mat. If ego is going to be an issue, it's going to be an issue initially, or it's going to be an issue early on, and then we're never going to see him again.
Yeah.
It's hard to get cops on the mat. Cops will be the first to tell you that they're alpha personality. A room full of cops is a room full of alphas. They're all, top dog.
Yeah.
Ow, ow.
Yeah.
But so none of them want to go and put themselves in a situation where it's going to be, glaringly clear that they're not. It can be a roadblock to getting them on the mat, right? It can be a hurdle to getting them on the mat. One of the best ways that we combat that is by creating this open environment, this open and welcoming environment for them to walk into, right? So if we can push them to get over that initial walking through the door, they will quickly see, while at the same time that they're being completely dominated, they're not being shamed. They're not being. It's not like they're being punished. They're not being put in their place. Right. This is a learning environment. Make no mistake, it's going to be clear that there's going to be a lot of learning to do, but there's going to be no shame behind the fact that you don't come in a natural, right? We don't expect anyone to come through the door and just start dominating everyone, right? Oh, I lift weights, I weigh 265 pounds, look at the instructors, 5'10", 150 pounds. There's no way that he's going to,
he
climb
feels
on top
like
of me
a car engine,
pin me down. And so it's a bit of a wake up call.
Yeah.
when that guy throws you, pins you, and holds you there. And for most people, I would say for most people, that's motivating. For most people, it gives them the sense that this is something they want to be doing. For someone that comes through the door with the mindset that they are going to be number one, it can have the opposite effect. Sometimes we get guys in there, big guys, wrestlers, who are fresh police officers, fresh out of the academy, and all they know about fighting is what they know about fighting from before the academy, because they didn't get anything in the academy that's going to be useful.
Right.
Coming into a room full of cops thinking that it's going to be like DT at the academy, like, oh, this is going to be some bullshit, and I'm just going to come and just wipe the floor with them. And they quickly find that they're mistaken.
Yeah.
Right? It's those guys that come in and have the ego, the enduring ego. They don't like that they weren't number one. They will leave and they will not come back. But the guys, for the most part, who just think that they're the alpha, they think they're big and strong, and they come in and they get pins. They're like, oh crap. Well,
they want to fix that.
There's the reality check.
Yeah.
They want to. Well, I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. I want to not ever feel like that ever again. And
it really comes down to either accepting that challenge or running away from that challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it's accepting that challenge. Most people come in and they get that feeling and they stick around because they want to be on the other end of that. Right? So
the other sort of phenomenon that I've seen in the group that we train with is you've got some that do take that challenge when they first come in, but then they hit a certain level of, and you mentioned this a little bit, where they hit a certain level of proficiency where they feel like, okay, I have crossed into a realm where I'm not worried about that basic, things falling apart and I'm being dominated moment. I've learned enough. I don't need to keep training. I can go do other sports that are less desirable, like golf or whatever.
Yeah.
But how do you any thoughts on overcoming that challenge? Because obviously, and I'm sure these are things you think, knowing you, these are things you think about all the time because you want these people to come back to training and continue to train. I know we have talked, at several classes when those people don't show up, how do we get them back? Yes. So I don't expect you to have the magic answer, or we would already be doing that. But
you can lead a horse to water.
What do you think drives that? Them deciding they've hit enough of a plateau that or a threshold that they can not keep training, and how do we overcome that?
The way that I see it, you have to be very careful about setting an end goal, setting a finish line, and deciding that is going to be it. That's the goal. Once I meet that goal, I've met that goal. That finish line should always be moving. What you see, police officers are just people. You see this with police officers. You see this with civilians. You see this all across the board. People that set an end goal, and once they meet that goal, they feel like they've met it and they just leave. For a lot of people in jiu-jitsu, that's the blue belt. For a lot of people getting into jiu-jitsu, because one thing about jiu-jitsu that's different from most other martial arts is it takes a long time to achieve each belt level. It traditionally takes a number of years between each colored belt level.
Right.
Somewhere along the history, somewhere along the way, in the past couple decades, they started introducing stripes to the belts to try to continue to motivate people to keep going. Way back in the day, when I started, I never had stripes on my white belt. I never had stripes. I got a blue belt before I ever had a stripe on anything. But you end up wearing that white belt for some years with what feels like no reinforcement of your progress.
Right.
So people set that blue belt as the goal early on. They say, this is years down the line, I'm gonna work and I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna work, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna work, I'm gonna get it. The issue is when they start to get close to that blue belt, and that blue belt is still the end goal. If you hit that blue belt and that blue belt is still the end goal, then now you're at the end.
Right.
Now you're where you wanted to be. You haven't reset your goal. You've met it, and it's easy to fall along the wayside after that. Because now you're looking at purple belt. Now you're looking at some more years. You're like, I climbed that mountain. I reached the peak. Do I want to climb another mountain? But each belt is not the mountain. Right. The practice is the mountain. The lifelong practice is the mountain. The black belt isn't the top of the mountain. Right. The black belt is me at this point feeling comfortable with my stride going up this mountain. It's me saying I'm comfortable with this hike. I know that this hike is never going to end. I'm recognizing that this goes on and on and on forever. Right. And I had, the other martial arts that I practiced, I brought up Taekwondo from when I was young. Right. Eventually, I hit that black belt in Taekwondo. That black belt was the end goal for years and years and years. And then I hit it, and then I stopped. Right. And Taekwondo, I mean, to be fair, was also not the thing that was resonating with me the most.
Right.
But I set that end goal, and I hit it, and I stopped. And years later, doing jiu-jitsu and looking at all the people that drop out after blue belt, I got to thinking about that. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That was my goal. I hit it, and I stopped doing it.
So you kind of touched on this, but so the goal for somebody starting out shouldn't be, I'm going to get to blue belt, and then that's all I need, and then then I can stop.
Right.
So what should the goal be? The goal should it? I think it sounds like you're kind of describing like, okay, this next belt is a summit, but you get there, and it's a false summit. And you're like, oh, I got to keep hiking to the next summit. And then you get to that one, and it's like, oh, I didn't see this other peak because I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
So what the goal should be, what? Coming in, like for someone, if they can get over the ego piece, if they can get over the first class and the uncomfortability that comes with just getting suffocated and smothered by somebody who knows pressure and all of that, once they get over that piece of it, what should the goal be?
I think it's okay to make the blue belt the goal initially, to make it sort of a checkpoint, right? Early on, as the white belt, I want to get to blue belt. I'm working towards the blue belt, but the closer you get, it's important to now start to pull a little bit of the focus off of that and to say, I'm getting close to that blue belt, right? I'm gonna be there anytime now. Right? Don't say that out loud. Don't say that to your professor. Right?
Yeah.
But when you start to get the sense that you feel comfortable in the fact that you are approaching your goal, reset that goal.
Right. So it shouldn't be an end goal. It should just be a goal.
You should, from the very beginning, you should recognize that this is something that never ends, that this is something that there's not a stop to. And then you can set yourself checkpoints along the way. The belts are meant to be checkpoints. That's what they're there for. But they're not meant to be the end all.
Right. Yeah. Well said. So obviously, you and I have known each other for a while, and my story, kind of what prompted me to want to do this, and which has evolved over at one point I was thinking I should do a nonprofit, and I don't know what I'm doing there. So this is kind of where I landed on doing this podcast thing, with a big piece of that for me is like the benefits of trauma recovery. Which, depending on somebody's law enforcement career, can be a big part of that. It was certainly part of mine. Just in general, do you think, do you notice, stress relief benefits from doing jiu-jitsu? And why do you think that is? Or why do you think it's helpful for people who have trauma and who are, to get on the mats and move around?
I think that there's a number of reasons that jiu-jitsu is an ideal sort of way to deal with that past trauma, with that stress that comes with it. Some of the things we've touched on already, jiu-jitsu is in a sort of a unique position to give you a sense of control and agency. Someone who has suffered trauma, someone who's suffered something that is out of their control, can benefit in that feeling that they're taking some more agency in their life. Other things like the fact that it's, any sort of real physical endeavor is going to bring some sort of stress relief. is going to engage the hormones in your brain
Right.
that cause you to de-stress. So there's that aspect to it too, that it's a highly physical pursuit that is going to engage all these hormones. It's going to get you feeling the right sort of way after a hard roll. It gives you a break from having to think about all these things. It resets your brain, right? When I walk onto the mat, sometimes I've got all these different things from the day going on in my head. You know, jiu-jitsu got me through a divorce.
Yep.
When I was in the midst of a divorce from a lovely woman who I wish her the best if she's listening, right? But the divorce, it was a very stressful and painful process, right? Just as an example, in the midst of the divorce, walking onto the mats, I've got all this stuff, all this baggage from the day that I'm walking onto the mats with. And then I've got this period of 2 hours where I'm forced to think about something completely different, where it just completely empties my brain. And now at the end of it, when it's time now to settle back into my life, I've reset my brain. I've got my tired muscles. I've got the right hormones in my head, reframing everything as I come back to it. So even in the short term, even on the day-to-day, it's like medication. It's like medication. You do it, and then you feel different, and then you see things different. And it works short term, it works long term too, right? The more you do it, the more you're able to modify your brain and your sense of control and your sense of agency in your life. The more it reframes these traumatic events from your past, the more you're able to process and get through these things.
Yeah, that's an excellent explanation, and I think the one thing that's always struck me about jiu-jitsu is it is one of the few, if not the only, kind of martial art that you can really test at near 100%.
Yeah.
You know, like up until that moment where somebody taps, you're locked in that moment with them, and you like if I have a bad day or whatever, like you said, I get on the mat and you don't have the ability to sit and dwell on, oh, I got cut off on the way here, or I'm having a X kind of day, because you're so the mind-body connection, and you're so locked in the moment with that other person that you're training with that it overrides all of that. And I like how you said it's a reset, because it really does. Like, I leave the mats most days, like euphoric, just like everything I just did was, incredibly helpful, and all of that stuff is just sort of drifting off.
Yeah.
So, like I jokingly said superpower earlier, but it's pretty damn close to a superpower in my mind. But yeah. So we've talked a bunch about, and we don't have to, beat this to death, but we've talked a bunch about like the benefits for cops. Can you just touch on, like, if somebody listening isn't law enforcement or doesn't want to be law enforcement? Obviously, I think the thing that applies for cops can also apply to veterans, but just general people, what is the benefit of a regular person off the street who may want to try jiu-jitsu? What do they get out of it?
Yeah, the benefits for just regular guy on the street run parallel to the same thing that we're talking about for law enforcement specifically. I mean, they mirror each other. You're getting good, very effective self-defense training, which is a multi-layered benefit, right? Like we were saying, it gives you the physical skills to deal with a situation. It gives you the confidence to know that you can deal with it. It gives you the confidence in your everyday life to feel like you've got some sort of control. It gives you an idea of what you're capable of. When you start to feel capable of that sort of very primal, like, protection, able to protect myself, able to handle myself, and sort of live in that state, live in that sort of calm, it starts to affect other aspects of your life too. It starts to affect everything in your life. When I walk around, I'm not always thinking, oh, I'm capable of beating this guy up, I'm capable of beating that guy. but I have just the general sense of where I am in the world and my place in the world and my ability to inhabit that space. You get so used to that feeling of control and inhabiting your space, that you can't help but feel that way in all aspects of your life. Walking around the house, making breakfast, interacting with parents, with children, with spouses, you have that sort of calm and composed nature. You have that just that sense of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some of the very philosophical level. Those are some of the benefits there, and then naturally the physical benefits. Fitness. It's a great workout. You're working every muscle in your body. All the way through college, even after college, I never went to the gym. I was never one of those guys who liked to go and run on the treadmill or lift weights. So martial arts was how I stayed fit. And I'm not a big muscly guy either, but
strong. You're very
yeah.
You're strong.
I'm strong, and I like to think that I'm pretty in shape.
Yeah.
For my age, even without that caveat, I'm pretty well in shape, and the bulk of that comes just from training. So it's a way to help you stay healthy in your body without having to go through the gym or the weights or the runs or whatever else doesn't really appeal to you. It's something that is it's engaging your mind as well, and that's something that is attractive for a lot of people. We were talking about how it's sort of a chess game. There's limitless combinations in jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
There's a limitless number of ways that we can end up, even at a finite number of finishes. And there's more paths being discovered all the time. You look at some of these high-level guys in training and competition, and the things that they're pulling, new moves that end up named after them, because they came up with some other sneaky way to end up in what's essentially one of 6 different ways to break the arm.
Right.
It's
It's like just when you think you've cracked the code, somebody changes the code.
Right.
And there's so many other codes. But,
exactly.
Where, as we wrap up, where would you like to see the program, the Vermont Police Jiu-Jitsu program, go? What's next for you? What's on the horizon for you? Anything exciting coming up? And or more of the, I mean, you train constantly and you're always trying to get people on the mat. So I'm sure that's probably not going to change, but like, where would you like to see the program go? What are you looking for in the future?
Naturally the easy answer is I'd like to see more people on the mats. To start off with, if I could just see more people on the mats day to day, I would be so content with that. But yeah, like you were saying, I spend a lot of time training. I'm not just sitting here preaching. I go out and I look for ways to expand my skills. I look for different things that I can bring back. Go to great national, international trainings with guys who specialize in different things. Like we hosted our first training here in Burlington. The Vermont Police Jiu-Jitsu co-sponsored a training. We brought Eli Knight and Aaron Giannetti here from Night Control Concepts to do their level 1 training, and that was sort of an experiment to see how that would go. I want to get more trainings here. Yeah. I want to get more trainers. I want to get more instructors who are attractive to law enforcement specifically here to run trainings. I want to get Chad Lyman here. Me and Chad have talked about it a number of times. Like I said, we're affiliated with his Code 4 Concepts. I'd like to get a bunch of the guys from Invictus. I still go. I travel. I do the Code 4 Concepts trainings. I go to Invictus trainings. I've done Knife Control Concepts trainings. I've got a slate of trainings that are going to happen this year and into next year. Like to get Rob Mago from Officer Survival Series down in Connecticut up here, right? Another one of those real like monoliths in jiu-jitsu for law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I would also like to, in addition to growing our classes on the mats where we train in South Burlington, I would love to start going around the states and running open mats. I would love to have the number of people, the requisite number of people to go and start to make that a thing.
To spread it out a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at what they're doing down in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Police Jiu-Jitsu guys are, over the past couple years since their founding, they've started running, trainings, open mats around the state. They are just incredible. What they were able to do in the last 2 years has been incredible.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that reflected in Vermont. Naturally, we're not as populous a state as Massachusetts.
Right.
Our law enforcement is fewer in numbers, but I would still. I mean, that's the goal, to try to get to that sort of level.
That's a good goal. Mm-hmm. I think we would be remiss if we've talked about the program, and it's in South Burlington, and co-hosting Knife Control Concepts. All of that, I think, is largely because of UFAI and their willingness way back when this kind of the Blue Belt program was started. They were a huge piece of that, and getting that off the ground with the space. And I mean, the Burlington patch is on the big patch. A larger one is on the wall at the place. Like, it's clearly a centerpiece of that they're very supportive of law enforcement. I think but for that, it would be probably look a lot different.
Yes, yeah. Besides the administration at the department, the other big partner in this endeavor, Chris and Deb Ballard, the owners of United Fighting Arts Institute, and Mike DeRozier, the head jiu-jitsu instructor there, have been, instrumental is an understatement.
Yeah,
they've been foundational to allowing this whole thing to happen. Without them allowing us to use the space, without them, giving their okay, giving their expertise, there would be no program.
Yeah.
Here right now.
Yeah, I mean, I know the department recognized them, with an award, the coveted badge. I think they got at an awards thing in the last couple of years, and huge. I mean, that is, you're right. It's an understatement is not even giving it enough.
No,
it's so profound of a contribution that
they're huge supporters of ours. They're huge supporters of law enforcement.
Yeah.
UFAI is the only Invictus certified gym in the state. It's the only one, Invictus LEO.
Yeah.
Big make it mandatory jiu-jitsu organization. They recognize gyms around the country,
right,
that are supportive of law enforcement. UFAI is the only one in Vermont that is on that list.
Yeah, that says something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, We've touched on a lot of things. I can't thank you enough for being my first guest. This is, I feel like we have set the bar. Anybody else coming on the show is going to have to be really interesting, because before we even talked about jiu-jitsu, you've just got a fascinating background and backstory. I'm honored that you agreed to come on and be my first guest. That's, like I said at the beginning, when I set this thing up in my head, I was like, who do I want? And you were you were. There was no other choice but to have you as my first guest. So I appreciate you coming on, and honored that you said yes.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure to do it. I was honored that you asked. So
excellent. Well, we will. I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to the Twisted Remedies show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share the show with anyone you think would benefit from the conversation. If you'd like to recommend a guest, a topic, or ask a question, please go to twistedremedies.com and connect with me there. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.